Alright, I want the forum to be able to see this because this is what they said was not really a big disability in me and that I'm just manipulative and made narratives. So, autism spectrum, a few years before I was diagnosed with, in 2013 it had been Asperger's, but once it became, that was the new diagnosis and it got shifted. It's put as moderate, which would be a level type 2 autism, which means moderate autism, and requires a decent amount of support and help to manage your life. It's not mild autism. That would be level 1, that would be mild. So I have level type 2 autism, and it's pretty serious. Now, I could have borderline personality disorder because I do have some symptoms. Now, I was diagnosed with borderline underage, so I'm pretty skeptical of the diagnoses, even though I do have some of the symptoms, and I don't really spit on anyone but my father, and I have more CPTSD related triggers that offset stuff, but major depressive disorder and borderline personality. Yeah, and then rheumatoid arthritis is marked as moderate. And you're gonna see some child cruelty in this report, and I'll go over it then. So so this is what they've put my developmental level as. So that has to do with me not being chronologically, and somebody in their 20s. Untreated medical conditions 3, and this was in 2025 this report was made. Now, I do not want to dox people again, which is why I had to remake this video. I have to be careful. You would see a lot of these behaviors in me are PTSD related ones, and it is something from abuse. I had to find where it was, but anyhow, I'm gonna just go to the childhood trauma point that I want to point out here. So first of all, with the mental health stuff, let me go here. I did have a PTSD crisis, and I stayed for 5 weeks there in a crisis shelter. A few years ago, I was developing rheumatoid arthritis, and my parents didn't believe me that I was sick and made me out a psycho. Where do I need to find it? Oh gosh. Okay. So, first of all, I want to point out several things here. So, I do actually like eating vegetables. That was my mother's report, and it's not true. I am mostly vegan, just to be clear, but occasionally I will eat animal proteins, like eggs and stuff. Now, I want to point out this, okay? So in the past, the tough love stuff. Now, this has nothing to do with why I call my mother and father abusive. You know, I call them abusive because they called me names. And, you know, my father called me worthless, a worthless piece of shit. I showed videos of it the other day when I was like screen recording text messages. You know, my mom did that too, called me different names. You know, both hit and terrorized me with objects. My father threatened to kill me all the time. You know, he sped and threatened to crash me in the car and to kill me. He terrorized me. You know, my mom held me to really serious double standards, and I've shown some in the past few days as well. You know, she purposely gave me COVID, you know, when having the autism meltdown to get me sick, and that could have activated the rheumatoid arthritis and, you know, PTSD stress. You know, covering up and blackmailing me out of sexual assault, like, to report it. And she manipulated me and my sister to lie to Child Protective Services to hide what my father was doing. There are so many reasons why I call them abusive. But, you know, this shit with the tough love and the drinking fluids and not eating for 2 days, that could really be called a form of child cruelty. Because the reason why I was refusing to eat the food was because she kept putting Lexapro in my food. And it made me have the worst headache of my life, and it also made me have serious problems writing poems. And my poetry was directly tied to my identity. This is why I say, you know, the paranoia with the food and stuff, you know, that resulted from it is actually an image-rooted thing, because I was fundamentally afraid of losing my identity from the Lexapro and the meds and her making all those threats. But, you know, letting your child go willfully, knowing, you know, for 2 full days to not drink water or to eat any food, honestly, I would call that a form of child abuse. You know? I mean, that's pretty fucking sick. I feel like people would agree, you know, that's traumatic to not have food or water for 2 days straight. Even if I was the one refusing to eat, it was because of something she was doing. And, you know, that she was putting the Lexapro on my food because I was refusing taking them, you know, on the naturalist, and I didn't like the black box warning for teenagers on there. And then, you know, I was breaking down crying at school, and she would get calls from the teachers because, you know, my father was abusing me, and I didn't realize he was abusive. I knew he was unloving, and then I was being bullied. So I was just always going to the bathroom stall and crying, and instructional aides would find me crying, and so, you know, they told her I need to get professional help, and, you know, that is what prompted that. So I was just having panic attacks at school that were really complex PTSD episodes and executive functioning stress. And yeah, but letting your child go 2 full days without food or water, you know, willfully, like knowing that they're not having it for something you're doing to them, I'd call that a form of child cruelty. You could argue that's child abuse. So basically, you know, my mother, you know, admitted that she did something very abusive, and it's documented. She probably framed me as crazy or, you know, whatever, or psychotic, but, you know, like, putting that Lexapro in your food, you know, and that being the reason why you're refusing the food, and letting your child starve like that and having no fluids, that's fucking traumatic shit, you know? I went through it.